this PowerPoint, we're going to talk about differences between first language and second language learning. Again, this is Dr. Huerta. So here are some points to consider for instruction and also in implications for your teaching. So we've talked about the process of first language acquisition and some theories. So now let's think about the characteristics of first language learners and second language learners. We've all been first language learners. Some of us have been second language learners. So L1 or first language learners are in the process of acquiring language. They are developing their cognitive abilities and they are learning language naturalistically without being aware of formal rules of grammar. And so in a way, this is a review from the last PowerPoint. Second language learners, on the other hand, have already acquired at least one language and have the ability to do higher cognitive tasks. So problem solving, complex memory tasks. They're not generally little babies, right? It could be older, usually. They also have the ability to treat language as an object. So they have this, we say, meta-linguistic awareness or awareness of their learning process, whereas a baby doesn't. It's just learning the language. Okay, so some methods to maximize second language learners' characteristics. This is very important. Use the L1 or first language to support learning of the L2 or second language. And I'm going to talk more about why that's so important. Also, motivate students to think at higher levels. Even if they can only respond initially with visuals or simple sentence constructions, that doesn't mean that a lot more is going on in their mind. Because remember, they have higher cognitive thinking. They just may be thinking in their L1 and unable to communicate these complicated ideas in their mind because they just don't have the vocabulary perhaps yet in the second language. Also, use grammar as a way to compare the L1 and L2. In other words, and make it evident to the students so the students can better understand common L2 errors and meta-linguistically monitor their own errors. So for example, when I taught bilingual students English, we would talk a lot about the differences in spelling. We talk about cognates, words that both came from Latin that are found in English and Spanish. I would just make it very evident to them. We would also talk about capitalization rules that were different in English and in Spanish. And just talking about them made them become aware of specific rules, but then they started noticing differences and patterns of differences. So talking about that is a very good strategy to maximize their learning. Environments in which we learn a first and second language tend to be different. Again, in the first language, the environment is usually informal. A child is allowed to be silent and listen, right? We're not forcing them to talk. We get excited when they speak, but they're allowed to be silent, and errors tend to be corrected. In a second language environment, usually the environment is more formal, perhaps in a classroom. Students are forced to speak, and there's also limited exposure to language. Think about the exposure that a baby has to first language, whether it's listening to its mother talk on the phone, or friends that come over in the house, or television. It's different when you're in a formal second language learning setting, right? So let's think about that. So some methods for improving the second language learning environment. So L2 teachers can be sensitive to help L2 learners succeed by providing a comfortable and supportive learning environment. Also, prompting but not forcing students to speak. That might just make them shut down. But if you can prompt them and give them time, and that's the next point, understanding that students need wait time, and may have an initial silent period when they're learning a second language. So it doesn't mean they're not thinking. They're just in that period of really just listening and trying to understand what's being said. And then also providing as much native-like exposure to the second language and practice of the second language as possible. So videos are good. You know, it's not just about you talking like I'm talking right now, but having multiple exposures to the language in different ways. Talking with peers is also helpful. Okay. Some cultural issues, if we think about first language learning, when you were or when someone is learning a first language, that person, that individual is close to his or her language or culture, right? Because that is their language. The individual is naturally part of his or her culture. But when you're learning a second language or someone is learning a second language, that individual may not have access to the second language culture group. The individual is also estranged from the second language cultures. Maybe some of you have studied abroad or gone abroad and you can understand this. There's this constraint that you're a foreigner as you're starting to learn this language. So then what do? You try to get to know the culture, you try to get to know the people, but there's this period where, you know, you have to adjust. Let me just make a note of this. Research has found that language learning and cultural understanding are closely related. So that's interesting. All right. So some methods for dealing with culture issues. So provide exposure to the second language culture. It's okay to talk about, you know, the history of the U.S. or history of the English language. Have guest native second language teachers and speakers come to the classroom. Have guest native second L2 students come. Use audiovisual tools, documentaries, movies, internet clips related to the second language history and culture. And this is very common in very successful like foreign language courses, for example, but it doesn't mean you can't also use it with your ELLs to a certain extent, as long as you're still valuing their language and their culture, and that they're open to learning about things. I mean, and already if they're in the US, they know about popular culture. That's one really easy way to do it. They're probably on Facebook, they're talking to friends, they watch TV, and that's part of the culture they would know that's associated with the English language. So in conclusion, some effective second language methods are to consider the L1 and the L2 learning theories, consider the L2 individual, and consider the learning environment that the student is in.